Before this video begins, I would like to give a quick thank you to my Asban Team level patrons Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Doctor Who's 60th anniversary is almost upon us. We have been blessed with 6 decades of this little show that could, so I thought I'd continue my journey into the show's illustrious past by taking a look at Doctor Who's first 10-year anniversary, or at least the closest thing to it. To mark the show's 10th season, the production team decided to unite all 3 Doctors in the same high-stakes dramatic adventure, aptly titled The 3 Doctors. You know, I bet that took a really long time to come up with. Indeed, The 3 Doctors sees the first 3 incarnations brought together to face off against the evil Time Lord villain Omega. It's a story that aims to be spectacular, with nostalgic reunions and a dimension-spanning narrative ushering in a new era of Doctor Who. But is it good? Does it do the 10-year birthday justice, or is it massively overrated? Well, as always, that's what I'm here to find out. So join me on a trip to the antimatter universe via unit headquarters, because it's time for a deep dive into the 3 Doctors.
I can see you've been doing the TARDIS up a bit. I don't like it.
During Doctor Who's first decade of existence, it had done it all. It had pushed boundaries with its experimental intro and electronic music. It had made audiences feel every possible emotion with companion departures and dramatic stories. It introduced one of science fiction's most iconic villains and found a genius way to ensure it could easily change the lead actor whenever it needed to. It had also escaped cancellation multiple times, solidifying itself as a British institution in the hearts and minds of the entire nation. So when it came to celebrating those 10 wonderful and chaotic years, it makes perfect sense to bring together so much of its heritage in the form of this multi-Doctor story. Of course, the 3 Doctors aired almost an entire year before the actual 10th anniversary date, but it's right to be considered the 10th anniversary special in hindsight, because it does successfully celebrate that incredibly successful decade of Doctor Who. It's kind of like Remembrance of the Daleks and Silver Nemesis in that regard. The Time Warrior aired closer to the actual 10th anniversary, but it's just a regular story. However, the 3 Doctors is explicitly made to be a celebration, so it's so much easier to consider that the anniversary story. I just wanted to preface the review with that disclaimer, because yes, I do know this story isn't actually an anniversary special in the same sense as the 5 Doctors or Day of the Doctor, but it's still worth considering it as such just because of the story's content and the intention behind its production. This story starts at a quaint wildlife sanctuary where a mysterious object has appeared by the lake, but Warden Arthur Ollis is more concerned with these swans, which presumably use their evil powers of telekinesis to make them vanish. I tell you, you can't trust swans. They're up to something, and the monarchy is in on it too. That's why they're so protected by the actual state. Naturally, this mysterious device winds up at UNIT, which is a lot more simple and cottagecore compared to today. Seriously, it's always funny to go from the giant towers and international private military of modern day UNIT to how it was back in the 70s, when it was just a converted house with some people hanging out and needing to get clearance from Geneva for everything. The scale is just so much smaller and less fancy, which makes it more endearing. And of course, UNIT at this time was headed by Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, who is probably the most popular and long-lasting character to not be considered a traditional Doctor Who companion. He had first appeared in Season 5's The Web of Fear and made regular appearances throughout the rest of Classic Who, meeting every Doctor except the 6th. The Brigadier was a strong focus of the Earthbound 3rd Doctor era, and something I've always loved about the unit leader is how he clashes with the Doctor, with such different worldviews and approaches. This is obvious in episodes like the Silurians, where they consistently butt heads and the Brigadier ultimately goes against the Doctor by destroying the Silurians even after the Doctor had negotiated peace, so they're a good counterbalance to one another. The tense relationship between the Doctor and the Brigadier feels very grounded in reality, because the Brigadier has to be the one worried about international relations and budgets. He's not just a grumpy, standoffish military man. He's trying to balance everything and keep all this chaos contained. The Doctor can swan around and get away with anything, but someone has to stay on Earth and pick up the pieces, dealing with all the fallout and the bureaucracy that comes with it. It's often easy to see the Brigadier as overreacting all the time, but it's impossible to imagine just how much stress he must be under at any given moment. He has to be a leader, he has to represent UNIT and control its day-to-day operations. Without possessing the incredible alien skills and abilities of the Doctor, the Brigadier just has to rely on his military and his procedures, things that have served him well in the past, so he he's always trying to find the tactical angle and think strategy in any situation, even if that creates a tense relationship between him and the Doctor. They're on the same side, but they have such different ideas on how to navigate situations, with their own individual goals and motivations, which we see in this story too, as the Brigadier even outright shouts at the second Doctor. It's a great example of how these two characters can get on each other's nerves despite being allies and friends. It remains very faithful to the Brigadier's characterization and makes him a strong, grounded character within the story. Anyway, after some scientific technobabble and x-rays courtesy of one-off character Dr. Tyler, the third Doctor and companion Jo Grant trundle off in the Doctor's car Bessie to have a gander at those damn swans. However, Dr. Tyler sees a scary face and he decides to peace out, so when our main protagonists return to unit, they find out someone has spilled some juice on the footage, so they hide behind a tree as to not get wet.
Oh, what's that?
Suddenly, all these strange mouldy jelly things start sprouting up all over the grounds of Unit HQ, so the guards immediately start a fight and get blown up. Hey guys, you don't have to shoot at them, just call the Power Rangers, they'll take care of it. These creatures are the so-called gel guards, which are essentially a mix between jelly and scabs. And no, I don't mean those who cross the picket line. I don't know what it is about the gel guards, I just really don't like them. They look really weird and goofy, not really coming across as a sinister threat. They just kind of waddle around the whole story and occasionally shoot explosions from their claws. The gel guards are kind of like the most generic Doctor Who monster, which I guess is fitting for an anniversary story like this, but they still just feel like a waste of time and their design has aged so badly. Even though the gel guards are invincible and actually kill random soldiers, they just don't strike me as scary or even notable. So all they end up being are these gross scabby jelly creatures bumbling around the whole time. It's a huge weakness to the narrative. There's a really nice moment as the Doctor pleads with Jo to leave because the gel guards only want him. It's a touching reminder of just how much she means to him, the kind of thing we see repeated many times in New Who, with scenes like 9 sending Rose away in the Series 1 finale, or 11 sending Clara away in Time of the Doctor. Throughout all their incarnations, the Doctor never wants to bring anyone down with them. They hate putting their friends in danger, so even though Jo doesn't get a whole lot to do in this story, she still has a decent role as she refuses to leave the Doctor's side, regardless of the danger that puts her in. As the invasion of Gwyneth Paltrow's goop continues and gets even worse, the Doctor has no choice but to take Jo and Sergeant Benton into the TARDIS, which gives us that really fun moment as Benton sees the impossible TARDIS interior for the first time, stunned into a shocked silence, but then admitting he's never really surprised when he sees weird things anymore. It's the same with the Brigadier, whose first reaction is to assume it's an optical illusion, or, even worse, a gross misuse of unit funds. I mean, can you blame him? You ain't exactly building that with 50p, a pair of shoelaces, and a packet of prawn cocktail crisps. Although, to be fair, that's exactly what the BBC themselves did. The situation is so serious, the Doctor decides he has to contact the Time Lords, who had previously forced him to regenerate and banished him to Earth to begin with, exiling him without the use of his TARDIS. However, it turns out that the Time Lords themselves are facing a dangerous predicament too, with an antimatter black hole draining their energy, or, something like that. This creates a rather unique situation where the Time Lords are forced to ask the Doctor for help. They'd previously been shown in a pretty villainous light, with rogue Time Lords like the Monk, the War Chief and the Master as individual foes, along with the wider species themselves being shown as antagonistic in the War Games. Therefore, it says a lot about the stakes of the situation that they're willing to put aside their differences with the Doctor so that they can help each other out. There's some nice dynamics between the Time Lords as they debate whether it's worth it, showing some clear lingering distaste for the punished hero. The President and the Chancellor of the Time Lords both argue about whether or not they should be breaking the first law of time by allowing the Doctor to cross into his own time stream, showing how severe this situation is that such a violation of everything they stand for is even an option in the first place.
Oh dear, we are in trouble, aren't we?
Indeed, the Time Lords pull the second Doctor out of his timeline and he arrives in the third Doctor's TARDIS, suddenly able to see colour for the very first time in his life. It's nice to see the second Doctor reuniting with Benton and the Brigadier, whom he'd already met in his own era. Nicholas Courtney has a great double take moment as the Brigadier realises the second Doctor is back, once again displaying his multi-layered character. Part of him is happy his Doctor has come back, never really having wrapped his head around the whole idea of regeneration. But part of him is also distrustful of it because it could be a trick and Jo is still in danger. However, he mainly just doesn't care what face the Doctor has, the only thing that matters is him doing what the Brigadier needs him to do. It's another solid example of how this character thinks and operates differently compared to the Doctor. He never quite gets the hang of the idea of multiple doctors, but he has much more to worry about during this situation and just wants to get his head down and do his own job. Anyway, apart from this, there is some absolutely brilliant chemistry between Jon Pertwee and Patrick Troughton. Their doctors bickering in the same way we later see in Day of the Doctor 40 years later. They keep trying to one-up each other and prove they're the better doctor, even when the universe itself is under threat around them. There are some clear differences between these two characters, with the third Doctor a lot more serious and uptight in comparison to the cheeky, childish and petulant second Doctor, so the characters feel very distinct and different and contrast each other really well.
What?
It's a song by the Beatles.
How does it go?
Oh, please be quiet.
The second Doctor is such a disruptive influence in this story. It's so fun to watch as he purposefully gets on his successor's nerves. There's actually an element of reality here, because the actual actors clashed a fair amount during rehearsals. According to the website A Brief History of Time Travel, where I get all of my behind the scenes information, Troughton's tendency to ad-lib clashed heavily with Pertwee's strict, precise adherence to the script. Troughton ultimately conceded and respected Pertwee's status as the lead actor, but it's interesting how the dynamic of their characters in the story is rooted in reality like that. In the narrative, their characters get along so badly that the Time Lords are forced to draft in the first Doctor to wrangle them and get them organised to actually make progress.
3 of them. I didn't know when I was well off.
I do like how they handle the first Doctor in this story. The original plans would have given him a much bigger role, but Hartnell's health was deteriorating a lot by this point, so he couldn't do much more than just sit in a studio and read off some cue cards, with the story explaining things away as him being stuck in a time eddy, telling his successors off for not having done anything yet. Obviously Hartnell helped build the show and was a key part of it succeeding, so it wouldn't feel like a celebration without him involved.
Oh, so you're my replacements. A dandy and a clown.
Through the magic of technobabble, they're able to give the first Doctor enough to do while remaining faithful to the character. It does feel kind of special considering he died just 2 years afterwards, and I like to imagine he knew his show was in safe hands, even if he didn't necessarily agree with the direction it was heading in compared to the tone and writing of his own era. The third Doctor and Jo end up getting caught by the energy juice, and they arrive in the scariest, most terrifying and alien place in the entire universe, a British quarry.
This is a place. It's just like any other place.
Yeah, you got that right, Doctor. I suppose the howling wind makes it a little bit creepy though, this place full of nothing but desolation and the remains of whatever else has been sent there. It's an impossible planet of sorts within a black hole, and oh wait, actually that sounds a little bit familiar. At least the maze-like interior of the antimatter universe looks a lot better, with a nice sense of corporate synergy as the walls are covered in the same weird blobs and scabs as the jelly guards. It's typically low budget, but unlike the guards themselves, it looks very creepy and alien, almost flesh-like in a way, as if the whole structure is some sort of living organism. The jail guards still look stupid though. However, they're merely pawns in a wider game controlled by Omega, one of the oldest Time Lords in existence and the secret mastermind behind all of this chaos. He's far from the first Time Lord villain the show has featured, but there's definitely something different about him when he reveals himself halfway through the narrative. Time Lords usually look human, but Omega has this big glittery robe and a giant metal helmet, giving himself an imposing aura of power about him. I do wish he had a bit of a deeper, more sinister voice to emphasize his nature as a godlike emperor of his own world, but even still, he has such a distinct appearance, setting him apart. Even the Doctors fear him, since Omega has a legendary status among their people as one of the first to unlock the secrets of time travel, and seemingly dying in the process, a heroic sacrifice. This background makes Omega a really fascinating villain, this long lost Time Lord who has grown bitter at being abandoned and forgotten. He wanted to be a god, to wield immense power and lead his people, but instead he's trapped inside this impossible antimatter black hole, a god without any subjects. Omega has the power to create all sorts of things, manipulating his surroundings, but he has nothing to really do with that power, which creates a brilliant dynamic for an incredibly strong villain like this.
Power is the only freedom that I seek.
Omega wants to get revenge on the Time Lords, hoping to convince the Doctor to free him, threatening him with death if he refuses, because you know, that always gets people on your side. However, then the second Doctor comes bumbling in, having transported himself and his unit allies into the antimatter universe, immediately getting into an argument with Omega and then the third Doctor as well. I actually love how the stuff with Omega and the Time Lords actually justifies the first ever multi-Doctor story. Omega has so much power and is already pushing the Time Lords to their limit, so the multiple Doctors physically have to be together to fix things, things because there's no other way. It's not purely a gimmick teaming up these incarnations just for the sake of it. There's a clear purpose there, a narrative reason to exist, which is so very important for a story like this. Also, I appreciate how the serial focuses on the Third Doctor specifically. This was one of John Pertwee's requests when the story idea was pitched to him. He was the incumbent Doctor, so it's only fair that he's the main protagonist, since the show itself centered around the Third Doctor at this time. However, the core theme of the story is teamwork and coexistence. Since the Second and Third Doctors have to overcome their differences to win, it's their only chance at escaping and beating Omega, so it makes for a satisfying final third act as they finally begin to work together as a cohesive unit, doubling their efficiency and they actually start getting stuff done. Omega, not wanting to be defeated, desperately fights back by sending this monstrosity into the Doctor's mind to wrestle with him. Yeah, it all looks pretty dumb. But hey, at least it's better than the average AEW match. There's a genuinely chilling moment as Omega removes his helmet, only to realise he has already been corroded by the antimatter universe. There literally isn't anything left of him anymore.
You exist only because your will insists that you exist.
It's a fascinating idea, this villain only able to survive because of his godly powers and spite. However, I'm not too keen on Omega sounding like a tantruming child when he discovers this flaw in his own existence. He does recover it a bit by going full mad scientist mode, Stephen Thorne really hamming it up and getting a bit campy as the villain flies into an unsalvageable rage and decides to, just blow the whole thing up, which is pretty fun. Knowing they can't battle Omega by conventional means, the Doctors then decide to troll him with a clever bluff and some cheeky wording of a promise.
I will not attempt to leave this world before you do.
It's a very smart use of the Doctor's ability to deceive and trick, coming up with all these schemes and manipulations to squirm their way out of trouble. They're able to negotiate the release of the other characters before then taking advantage of Omega's anger as they trick him into defeating himself. Indeed, they have a force-filled contraption box thing and demand he take it to free himself. Thinking he's a big brain Giga Chad playing 4D chess, Omega assumes this is a trap and mocks them, destroying the box, saying how stupid they are to think that would work. However, this is actually what the Doctors wanted all along, the action destroying the antimatter universe and the black hole itself, therefore saving the Time Lords and the Doctors too. Congratulations, Omega.
You played yourself.
Having saved the day, the Doctors return to Earth and stroll out of the TARDIS all confident and full of swagger, as if they'd barely broken a sweat when navigating the crisis. The explanation of the solution is all a bit techno-babble, but it's rewarding to see this new equilibrium. Everyone's safe and sound as the Doctors bid a fond farewell to one another.
It's been so nice to meet me.
Yes, I see what you mean.
There's a nice sense of closure and triumph, but I appreciate the Third Doctor questioning the morality of his destruction of Omega. He knew there was nothing else he could do, no way to free Omega without destroying the universe, but he still carries that burden of killing one of his own people, which is actually oddly prophetic of days to come. However, as thanks for his work in the crisis, the Time Lords give the Doctor his own freedom, returning his dematerialization circuit and restoring his knowledge of time travel, allowing the Doctor to return to his old nomadic lifestyle. It's a suitable way to wrap things up and to usher in a new era of the show, assuring viewers that it won't be limited to modern day Earth anymore. It's a very symbolic development for the show and it feels like a fitting reward for the story, progressing the series itself by returning that ability to travel. By this point, the whole Earthbound approach had started to wear a little thin, so it's a fantastic way to cap off this special and kickstart season 10 as a whole. Despite only being an anniversary special as a technicality, The Three Doctors is a fantastic celebration of Doctor Who. It celebrates the show in a beautiful and nostalgic way with the returns of two previous Doctors. Early drafts also pitched a return for Fraser Hines as Jamie McCrimmon, the definitive Second Doctor companion, but Hines' work on Emmerdale Farm scuppered these plans and his part was instead given to Benton, which I actually think is a blessing in disguise as the Brigadier and Sergeant Benton assume the roles of, the straight men in the narrative, confused and overwhelmed by all this chaos, which only seems to get weirder by the second. Joe Grant does kind of get lost in the shuffle unfortunately, but the titular Three Doctors are fantastic and integrated so well. As the first ever multi-Doctor story, it works fantastically, with a suitably high stakes and climactic narrative, full of exciting action sequences, explosions and chase sequences to drive home the significance of the story as a whole. Omega, whose name I have intentionally mispronounced and correctly pronounced all throughout the video because, they say it wrong in the episode, so I just just wanted to cover myself here, is a strong and big time villain, although the jail guards are a bit pathetic and their design has aged so badly. I definitely recommend checking out the Three Doctors, even if it is just the edited omnibus released as part of the Tales of the TARDIS series. It's a fun celebration of the show's first decade, although it's a shame a Zoe cameo at the end of the story was shot down because Pertwee believed too many returning characters would detract from the show's current cast. While it's hard to blame him since you don't want to lean too much on the past and overshadow the present, a simple cameo would still have been nice. Even so, the dynamic between the Doctors is fun and Hartnell is involved in a sweet and entertaining way despite the limitations of his health. It's not a story that gets too self-indulgent, it has a proper narrative and actually propels things forward, so it's definitely worth checking out at some point because it's genuinely a decent serial. But what do you think? Is the Three Doctors a good celebration of Doctor Who, or is it a bit of a swing and a miss? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time when we take that 3 and turn it into a 5. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye. And I'd just like to thank my Asbantium level patrons Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson, my Diamond level patron Glenna Clark, my Platinum level patrons Maximilian Foreman and Nix Games, and all my Gold level patrons Boots, Daniel Shillito, Franzorn aka Line Vortex, Robert Hock, and Tom Azar. Thank you so much for your support.